If I see another video talking about Call of Duty or Counter-Strike 2 or that overrated Valorant for the millionth time, I might actually lose it. We all know the heavy hitters, the games that sell millions and dominate the charts, but the first-person shooter genre is so much deeper than that. So today, we are digging through the dirt to find the diamonds. I am talking about the weird, the overlooked, and the straight-up gems that slipped through the cracks. These aren't just good games, these are experiences that redefine what a gun in your hand can feel like. So if you are tired of the same old meta, stick around because here are some of the best underrated FPS games you absolutely need to play. Okay, so let's kick off this list with Serious Sam Siberian Mayhem, because for the longest time, Serious Sam was thought to be pretty much long dead franchise. It really seemed like the developers didn't know what to do with him, where to take the franchise, or anything. But thankfully, they kind of went back to basics with this more straightforward spin-off adventure where you're placed in a Siberian environment and your job is simply to shoot a bunch of monsters. The gameplay here is nothing particularly new, it's just you, Serious Sam, stopping in one open area and fighting a ton of enemies, using a bunch of different weapons at your disposal. The movement is fast, the action is good, and the violence is completely over the top. It's classic Serious Sam through and through, but now with some newer enemy types and some interesting new environments to explore, and, going really deep into that Siberian Russian stuff with some urban environments, all the snow, and then kind of mixing that with some of the classic Serious Sam sci-fi elements and creepy monster displays. It's just really good, right? If you're someone who likes games where you shoot things, run up to pick up health, armor, and ammo drops, and just keep moving forward, this is definitely a worthy pickup. It's honestly pretty underrated because realistically everybody really just thought Serious Sam was dead, so I think people had kind of written it off. But it's still surprisingly solid and a lot of fun. Coming in next is 6 Days in Fallujah. This is one of the titles that faced a ton of backlash before launch, and honestly, it's interesting how it kind of faded into the background of gaming history so fast after it finally came out. But you know what? Regardless of the talk surrounding it, the game is actually worth a look, though I'm talking about the gameplay specifically and maybe not the current price point because, man, that's a big ask. The core of the issue is that it's just such a compelling experience that probably feels more like a real-world engagement than almost anything else out there when it comes to stakes and atmosphere. If you've ever spent time doing tactical training or even just playing airsoft, you'll recognize that specific tension where you're approaching every doorway with total focus and immense pressure. I really feel like the game captures that boots-on-the-ground reality quite well, and the documentary-style presentation makes the whole thing feel much more grounded. It's not a perfect one-to-one, but having actual veterans share their accounts between levels is just super engaging and adds a lot of weight to the missions. They eventually move toward more randomized, procedurally generated maps for the co-op play, which honestly adds a nice layer of unpredictability compared to the more scripted stuff. With how crowded the industry is right now, this is a project that's easy to overlook, but there's definitely something here that's worth seeing in some form, even if it's just checking out a deep dive on how they handled the historical accuracy. But yeah, I think it's genuinely impressive. Coming in next, we have a bit of a curveball with Fashion Police Squad, which might sound like a bit of a gag, and honestly, it totally is. It's a very funny game, obviously, but it's also a surprisingly good and incredibly creative take on the first-person shooter genre. Seriously, the level of creativity here is wild, especially when you realize your targets are just people with incredibly unsightly or unfashionable taste. I'm talking about dudes wearing sandals with socks or just wandering around in the most hideous gear you've ever seen. So, as a member of the Fashion Police, you've got to step in and basically beat these guys up to save them from themselves, killing them with kindness, using shooter-style weaponry. Your main gear is this neat little device that shoots needles and thread, and there are plenty of other specialized weapons to unlock along the way. But instead of just ruthlessly murdering everyone, you're actually helping them by blasting away their bad shorts, or completely wrapping them up in a much more fashionable ensemble. It's just such a blast to play, and I'd say it's easily one of the most original things we've seen in a long time. In the FPS world, we usually just get wacky guns that shoot random stuff, right? But you rarely see a developer get this creative with the idea of weapons that actually fix things and help the NPCs. You can really feel the passion the developers had for this project because at the end of the day, the game is just genuinely fun to play.
You know what time it is, Bounty Hunter. Let's light their asses up.
Alright, next up we've got High on Life from Squanch Games. They've made these weird first-person shooter games over the years that have all kind of taken different forms and experimented with ideas, but High on Life is the most straightforward they've ever done. It's a first-person shooter game through and through. Yes, it's a weird one for sure, but it is undeniably a first-person shooter where you kill a bunch of aliens, explore these different worlds, and seemingly blow holes and shoot through all the environments you encounter. But the real hook is you get this unique interactivity with your actual guns. Your guns talk to you constantly. They're essentially fully fledged characters that keep you going and propel the story forward as you progress. It's such an interesting idea and concept on top of the fact that your guy isn't just a straight up dude who only shoots things, you know? You have different gadgets to play with. Sometimes, you know, you have bladed weapons that you can use to zip around the environment and really mix up your approach. There are a lot of reasons why we put this on this list. It's unique in so many different ways, and it's pretty dang fun from start to finish. It surprisingly lives above the source material, which is apparently, you know, obviously it's like very inspired by Rick and Morty, but thankfully it's not just pounding you over the head with that influence constantly. It's just a fun, weird, lot of blood, full explosions, Gatling gun guy running around and killing a whole ton of things. That's it, man. That's why it's on this list. No question. And next up, we have Celico. So if you want something that hits way harder than you'd expect, this is definitely the one. You will be taking on the role of Dawn, a security captain in an underground bunker, and when the shooting starts, the environment just gets completely decimated. And even though it's running on GZ Doom, which, let's be real, is pretty old school tech, you would never guess it because the way things break apart in this game is just incredible. With glass shattering, decor falling, and enemies reacting realistically to every hit, it has a visceral feel that puts most modern blockbusters to shame. The AI takes a page out of the Fear playbook, so they're actually smart enough to flank you and use grenades to keep you moving instead of just standing there. This makes it way more tactical than a standard retro shooter, forcing you to dive into cover and use slides to stay ahead of the chaos. I'll admit the maps are massive and getting lost is a real possibility, but the developers included these subtle green lights to point you in the right direction, which I really appreciate. There's also this cool persistent detail where any mess you make in a room stays there for the rest of the game, which just adds to the immersion. And hey, you can literally heal yourself by eating individual slices of pizza from a box. And I mean, what more could you actually want? If you've always figured that retro-inspired games are just basic, Celico is absolutely going to prove you wrong. Even though it's technically early access, the level of polish makes it feel like a complete, finished experience already. Coming in next, let's talk about being a fish out of water for a second, because we've all had those days where we feel like we've just been dropped into a situation we have absolutely no business being in, right? Well, that's honestly the entire premise of Sun and Bone, where you're this local sheriff named Sam Judge, just trying to track down some bandits, but instead you get ripped through a portal and dumped into a world filled with dinosaurs. It's an old school, fast-paced shooter that really doesn't care about being realistic, and to be fair, that's exactly why the whole thing works. I mean, it's basically like if Turok had a baby with Doom Eternal, and that kid grew up in the desert, you know? You're using these heavy, chunky weapons to blast through raptors and tyrannosaurs, and the game really rewards you for being aggressive with these glory kill style finishers that are actually pretty brutal. Now, this game is far from perfect, but if you can disregard all of the flaws, then I'm sure you'll totally enjoy it.
You ready?
Yes, sir. Ready.
Move! 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 Take it down!
Suspect down!
Right is down!
Okay, so next up is Ready or Not. Now, after all those years in early access, it has finally officially released. So now all you weirdos who refuse to play early access versions can finally get your hands on this SWAT simulation game. Essentially, you're part of a SWAT team getting deployed to bomb threats, house raids, and terrorist takedowns, all set in this city that just seems to be perpetually on fire. You've got a single-player campaign to work through, along with a variety of cool multiplayer modes to mix things up. You'll run through levels set all across this just overwhelmingly crime-ridden city, and seriously, the levels are freaking awesome. Like, genuinely some of the most realistic I've seen since Half-Life 2. There are all kinds of really fun surprises and optional stuff tucked into each mission, and let me just tell you, the missions can go wrong really, really fast if you're not on your game. You have to be methodical, you have to be careful, you have to watch your angles, clear every room, and constantly ID everybody, because if you so much as look at someone sketchy the wrong way, or accidentally shoot a civilian, Your mission is just done. Ready or Not can be pretty unforgiving like that. And missions, like I said, can end abruptly if you accidentally break the rules or the laws, all those crazy laws in this fictional world, but somehow it's still something uniquely exciting. It's just a very different type of game to play. The levels are really the star here. Incredibly detailed and just absolutely awesome. The AI and everything surrounding it are really well done too, and there's a good variety with tons of weapons, gear, and utility items to choose from. Ready or Not, we were waiting on it for a while, but now it's finally out for everybody, and it was worth the wait. Next on the list is Vampire Hunters, which is honestly just extremely different compared to everything else we've talked about today. I mean, sure, it's a first-person shooter, but it's also essentially a roguelike horde survivor, and we've all seen a million Vampire Survivors clones by now, right? You know the deal, those top-down games where you're a tiny guy auto-shooting while picking up gear and power-ups as monsters swarm you, but this takes that exact formula and sticks it in first person. That shift completely changes how you play because you have to be way more aware of your surroundings, since you can't just see everything running up behind you on a big screen anymore. It's definitely more fast-paced too because at the end of the day, it's a shooter, not some slow burn strategy thing. You're out here mowing down massive hordes and grabbing new weapons on the fly, and it all comes together in this really unique, creative package that totally nails that same addictive, adrenaline-pumping loop. Honestly, during the downtime, when things aren't as chaotic, it even feels a bit chill as you're swooshing through a library setting with bats on your tail. Vampire Hunters is just a unique, laid-back little experience that might not have the most mind-blowing visuals, but that core gameplay loop is exactly why we had to give this game a shout-out. So next up, if Vampire Hunters was about quantity of guns, Project Warlock 2 is about quality of carnage. This is the sequel nobody talks about enough, and it takes the foundation of the first game, you know, that claustrophobic, lo-fi romp through hell, and blows the doors wide open. We are talking full 3D movement now with jump pads and vertical arenas that let you fly around like a demonic pinball. You play as 3 different disciples of the original Warlock, and each one plays like a completely different game. First, you got Palmer, the balanced badass with dual-wielded ice and fire magic. He is your classic run and gunner. Then you switch to Erd, who is this nimble glass cannon using daggers and TNT, forcing you to dance through crowds instead of tanking them. And just when you think you have seen it all, you get to Kirsten, whose heat-based weapons and summoning magic literally let you tear through cosmic horrors with demonic claws. The upgrade system lets you turn a basic double barrel into an automatic quad barrel shotgun that just melts cyber demons. Honestly, the game stumbles a bit in the third chapter. The level design gets shorter and the soundtrack loops can get repetitive, but the raw feel of the weapons is top tier. It is underrated because people wrote it off as just another boomer shooter, but it is actually 3 distinct power fantasies stacked into one bloody anthology. So next up, we have Trepang 2. This game is basically a wild, high-speed murder fest from start to finish. It's definitely fast, but it doesn't quite feel like a traditional boomer shooter. Instead, it's more like an old-school Soul wrapped in some seriously intense modern visuals. And honestly, it's a gorgeous game to look at, assuming you find beauty in grenades that turn enemies into liquid and shotguns that smear opponents across the masonry, you know? Underneath all that satisfyingly gory destruction, there's a surprisingly deep experience that's worth your time. Beyond the simple joy of blowing stuff up, you're getting large levels packed with secrets and these strange little ghost stories that add a lot of flavor you wouldn't instinctively expect. For a shooter to work this well, the feel of the combat has to be spot on, and the developers clearly focused on the hit reactions and the beefy sound design of the arsenal. And, they really didn't hold back here, so if you want plenty of chances to zip around and saw enemies in half, this game delivers exactly that. Plus, it serves as a fantastic showcase for what modern tech can do, making it a real treat for anyone with a high-end rig.
This was such a pain!
Moving right along, we have Mullet Majak, and man, if you haven't checked this out, it's essentially like a 90s anime in a blender had a kid that grew up obsessed with synthwave culture. This is a roguelike FPS where you've literally only got 10 seconds of life left, so you're basically on a permanent fuse unless you're constantly taking out robots to stay alive. It's incredibly quick, and the vibe is this neon-soaked hallucination that feels like playing a lost VHS tape from the back of a shelf. You're fighting through these randomized floors in a giant skyscraper, and the whole point is just, well, keep the momentum going or you're done for, right? Honestly, while the visual flair with its crisp lines and retro aesthetic is the first thing you notice, the actual rhythm of the game is what keeps you coming back. It's got that super addictive quality where you want just one more run to unlock better upgrades and weapons that make you feel like a god right before a robot humbles you. It's the work of a small crew in Brazil, and you can tell they were incredibly passionate about nailing that specific style of hyper-violent old-school cartoons. I'd argue it's one of the most unique shooters in years because it doesn't give a damn about being realistic. It just wants you to move fast and look cool. If you're someone who's bored of slow-paced tactical games, this is the literal cure for that. It's nothing but pure, high-octane energy. Also, the soundtrack is absolutely killer, especially if you like that pulsing electronic beat that gets your heart racing. It's available on PC, and I'm telling you, the experience is worth it for the sheer style of the kill animations alone. And next on the list, we have Superhot. This is already a decade-old game, but, I feel like a lot of people missed this one out, and if I had to break it down, it's basically like being Neo in that legendary Matrix lobby scene, only it's presented in a stylized arcade format. You're out there fighting and grabbing weapons, but the hook that changes everything is that time is essentially frozen until you start moving. This means you can actually watch bullets crawl through the air and dodge them, but you've got to keep shifting and weaving if you want to reach an enemy, punch them out, and steal their weapon to keep the chain going. It's honestly just a perfect execution of a really unique idea where the world only stays in motion as long as you do. It's a game that looks incredibly simple on the surface, but the way it plays out is just pure genius and so satisfying. Superhot has such a great, focused core concept that really proves you don't need a million features to make something great. Even though it leans into that smaller arcade-style experience rather than being some giant epic, it's still a must-play for any fan of shooters. If it somehow stayed off your radar all this time, you really need to go back and fix that. Okay, so next up, let's talk about Immortals of Avium, which is a really well-made first-person title that ended up flying under the radar for way too many people. I think people were just quick to judge the concept or the aesthetic, which is a bit of a shame, right? This was a huge AAA swing from a studio that sadly didn't find its footing, even though it was stacked with veterans who worked on Call of Duty back in the day. You can really tell they knew what they were doing, though it's definitely its own thing, a shooter where you're literally casting spells instead of reloading a magazine. Imagine the scale and the massive set pieces of a big military shooter, but you're a mage navigating a fantasy realm with multiple powers at your disposal. You're still blowing things up and managing different types of ammo, but it feels more like using Bioshock abilities than anything else. So once you settle into the mechanics, the gameplay feels remarkably fresh and original. Honestly, just having a big budget single player campaign like this makes the whole experience worth your time. Sure, it has its flaws, like some of the world building and voice work being a little hit or miss, but the overall feeling is just so rewarding. But at the end of the day, it delivers those intense combat moments that any fan of the genre is going to appreciate. Moving on, we've got Echo Point Nova. If you're familiar with the team behind Severed Steel, which we will also be giving a shout out later, you know they love going fast, but this time it's like they put that speed into a massive open world setting. It's a shooter where you're literally on a hoverboard surfing through these giant floating structures and blasting drones out of the air as you go. The whole hook here is definitely the movement. It's all about building momentum with grappling hooks and wall runs, so you basically never have to land if you've got the hang of it. Now, it can honestly be a little dizzying when you start because you're flying around so fast, but once you find your rhythm, you feel completely unstoppable. Thankfully, there's no fall damage, which is a massive plus, since you'll be hitting the ground a lot while you're still finding your feet, or your board, I should say. You spend your time exploring these vast environments and fighting huge bosses, and to be honest, the sheer scale of the fights is just impressive for an indie title. There's also a co-op mode included too, so dragging a friend into the madness is an option, making the whole high-flying experience even funnier when you both end up crashing into a building. It's really just a game built around the pure thrill of movement, much like the old-school vibes of Titanfall or Tribes, you know? So if you're the kind of player who wants to see how inventive FPS mechanics can get when they ditch realism for fun, this is definitely the game to watch. It's available on PC, and for anyone who loves fast-paced combat that lets you figure things out on your own, it's a must-play. Next up, it's Dead Zone Rogue. You know, while it's true that roguelite shooters are everywhere these days, hardly any of them actually pull off the transition from 2D progression to a high-stakes first-person view as well as this. And this experience is really as raw and concentrated as a sci-fi rogue can possibly get. You find yourself navigating in a giant abandoned space station where the halls are randomized and the loot is everywhere. Rather than sticking to a slow or overly tactical pace, the game hands you high-speed movement tools like air dashes and these deep elemental synergies that are just super satisfying to master. Honestly, it feels like Quake and Hades had a baby that was abandoned in the far reaches of space to survive on its own. You're constantly juggling your weapon heat levels and cooldowns while weaving through projectiles from rogue drones and huge boss encounters. It's definitely a chaotic ride, but it stays on the right side of fair, you know? The visual style uses those gritty, low-poly models and moody lighting to really capture that old-school Deus Ex or System Shock vibe. It's basically the perfect digital jolt of energy for a boring afternoon. And you know, this is such a great, tight shooter that really nails why we always say just one more run before bed. If you're just hearing about this now, the good news is that it's already available to play on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation. So next on the list, we have Angerfoot, and look, if you dig Hotline Miami but want a protagonist who fights like a mix of John Wick and a super aggressive Bruce Lee, this is the one. It's a first-person shooter where you're obviously using guns, but you're also using your feet to roundhouse kick enemies into oblivion, which is just incredibly satisfying. The game has this wild sense of speed and a constant flow of energy that makes the movement feel totally different from your typical FPS, you know? It's got a really addictive loop where you'll clear a room with a weapon and then immediately close the gap to just pummel someone with a well-placed boot. And you know, I just love how extreme and exaggerated the world is too, with all these weird hulking thug creatures and bizarre enemies waiting for you around every corner. It's honestly just a really creative and fun little game that feels very fresh. And while we've seen kicking mechanics in other shooters before, it's never felt this cohesive or moved this well in one dedicated package, right? So I'm giving this a really high recommendation because if you're into shooters at all, you absolutely have to try this. It's a total win in my book. Okay, so next up we've got Severed Steel. Now this is a game that quietly launched a couple of years back and it was really, really worth your time then, no question. It's more of like an arcade style FPS game where, you know, you're shooting guys, shooting things, picking up weapons off of them as you go, you know, blowing up buildings and just keep pushing forward essentially. It's a little bit more arcadey and a little bit more focused towards a pure gameplay experience without getting bogged down in story. It's not exactly a massive game. It doesn't have this sweeping narrative or crazy environments. You're mostly just killing enemies in warehouses and industrial settings, but the difference is in the way you kill guys. You have these crazy powers of movement. You could slide, you could jump, you could spin 360 degrees in the air like it's nothing. It's very, very much something that people would call like a bullet time simulator. It's like the fighting equivalent of a Max Payne bullet dodge in terms of style and execution. Like you could just do this completely out of this world flip and then seamlessly transition into shooting a bunch of guys that looks and feels really cool every time you pull it off. Severed Steel is underrated for a bunch of different reasons, and especially just because of things like this, the fluidity, the freedom. It all just works so well together. So if you haven't tried this one yet, you definitely should check it out right now. So next up is Beyond Hanwell. You know, this was created as a follow-up to the original Welcome to Hanwell, and it's essentially this gritty open-world horror project. It masterfully mixes brutal melee combat with this really suffocating atmosphere, and the result is a genuinely unique and intense survival experience. Basically, the game just throws you into this enormous ruined city where pretty much every nook and cranny feels like a handcrafted nightmare, and luckily you've got this dual wielding system so you can actually scrap with some truly horrific entities. You'll weave your way through these derelict buildings and foggy streets, all in an effort to uncover the mystery of what actually happened here. The environmental storytelling is just an absolute pleasure too. And then you mix in this deeply unsettling mystery about the city's past and the anomalies that now roam the streets, and it's easily one of our favorite indie horror titles. Really, it's a game all about using your surroundings and whatever blunt objects you can find for the most desperate takedowns, which hands you more creative control as you fight through hordes of twisted creatures. Plus, dying isn't just a simple reset, you know? You'll actually learn the layout of the city and can then try new, stealthier approaches to avoid the bigger threats lurking in the shadows. Scavenging for scraps is probably one of the more average activities, I'll admit, but finding a hidden basement that hasn't been touched since the collapse is definitely one of the more chilling options out there. Honestly, there's just so much lore and so many unique encounters packed into this massive map to explore as you gear up, survive, and knock so many creepy monsters into the dirt, and I seriously mean it's a lot of monsters you're going to be doing that to. Coming in next, we have Postal Brain Damaged. Now, I know exactly what comes to mind when you hear Postal, but trust me, it gets even weirder than you're imagining, right? It keeps that same crass, totally self-aware humor and all those pop culture nods, but it completely ditches the usual third-person crazy dude on the street framework the series is known for. Instead, we're looking at a hardcore boomer shooter style, a relentless run-and-gun experience that's actually a damn good game in its own right, you know? It's packed with kooky humor and wild visuals at every turn, plus all these insane references and lines that sound like something straight out of a bizarre fanfic, though I promise that's all actual game dialogue. Honestly, Brain Damaged is just a total blast, and even if you think the Postal brand of humor is a bit played out at this point, the game totally makes up for it with creative level designs and some truly frantic enemy encounters. You've got all the satisfying blood, gore, and exploding stuff you could want, making it a fresh take on the formula that I'm honestly just glad exists. It's fun as hell to play, and while it might be the dumbest timeline imaginable for the franchise, it's a massive recommendation from me. And coming in next, if you have ever wondered what it would look like if Doom fell into an inkwell and crawled out covered in tentacles, forgive me, Father 2 is your answer. This game looks like a comic book thrown into a wood chipper with bold black outlines, hand-drawn sprites, and blood splatters that actually feel juicy when they hit the screen. And the guns, oh man, the guns. Well, you start with a standard pistol, but you can upgrade it into a grotesque aquatic creature that literally fires fish spines at eldritch horrors, and no, I am not making that up. You will be running through Lovecraftian nightmares, switching between a shotgun and a rifle that you reload by jamming your hand up its fishy backside to push out a runic tablet. It is disgusting, it is hilarious, and it is absolutely metal. The music kicks in with these crushing electric guitar riffs the moment combat starts, and suddenly you are not scared of Cthulhu anymore. You are pissed off at him. The game is tough though, with ammo that are just scarce, and enemies evolve into twisted versions of themselves the longer you play. One wrong move and a sniper that tracked you through a wall will erase your health bar instantly. But honestly, that tension just makes the carnage sweeter. But yeah, those are just some of the best underrated FPS games that we highly recommend. If you like this video, click like, and if you're not subscribed, well, you know the drill. Hit that sub button and that's it. Anyway, that's all for today. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.